So what is a pyrotechnician?
I would say it is a professional who is qualified and is properly trained on the safe execution of doing fireworks displays.
How much training goes into it?
It's a license just like any other profession, whether you're a CPA, which I also am, or a lawyer or a medical doctor. You're getting a license from the state that shows and demonstrates that you have gone through the proper training and have the proper background to be able to do this. And in my particular case, it's a lifelong thing. I grew up in the profession. My dad, while not a licensed pyrotechnician, has been in the community for pretty much his life, which means it's the entirety of my life. I grew up doing this. And then when I turned 18, that's when I really kind of started shooting shows. And that, at least here in the state of California, is the minimum age to be able to handle pyrotechnics. And for the first several years, it was just apprenticing. It's just basically learning from other people. And I would say that it is very much a tradition that's been handed down thousands of years, really kind of going back to the invention of black powder to today, from person to person.
Would you say it's a difficult job?
When you're a crew member, it's often working with the pyro itself. It's a very physically demanding job. We like to say it's firework, because it is work. The equipment we're working with, the mortars themselves are very heavy. You could be working with anything from stuff that weighs, a couple of pounds to hundreds of pounds. A 10-inch mortar, which is a steel gun, has a side-in wall, probably about a quarter inch of cold rolled steel, in a sanded mortar box can weigh 1,000 pounds easily.
The mortar is what fires the firework, right?
It's the tube that ultimately the firework will leave from. And when a firework goes off, we have a firework seated at the bottom of the mortar. And when we light it, it produces a ton of gas, like a tremendous amount of gas. And that creates a concussion at the bottom of the mortar that ultimately projects the shell out of the mortar itself up into the sky. And we know roughly, the size based off of the diameter of that shell, how big it'll go, meaning how wide it'll shoot, how high it'll go in the air, how long it'll take to get to the apex. And all of that's determined by the firework itself and ultimately the mortar you use.
So is this a math equation at the end of the day? Like, if you put this much stuff, it'll go this far, it'll be this big. Like, is it predictable or is there an unpredictability to it?
It's not 100% a formula. It's art and science, but we roughly know, if I do this and this and this, it's going to yield something that'll look something like this. Now, just like a baker baking a cake, you can, have some variations on that. But for the most part, we know roughly what it's going to be. And what I would tell you, the rough calculations, this isn't perfect, but the rough is that for about every inch of diameter of shell, and typically you'll start off, the smallest shells are going to be about 3 inches, and those are our finale shells, going all the way up to the largest standard production size is 12-inch, but I will point out they can go much bigger than that, much bigger. But roughly for about every inch of caliber, it's roughly about 100 feet of burst, meaning it'll go 100 feet wide. It'll go 100 feet in the air and it'll take a second to get there. So roughly, let's say like an 8-inch shell, which would be a fairly large 4th of July production shell that we would use. That'll roughly go about 800 feet wide. It'll take 8 seconds to apex and it'll go about 800 feet in the air, roughly.
The fireworks themselves, are these basically just big black cats, like the kind of thing that somebody could buy? Or is it, no, it's a fundamentally different type of firework?
We have 2 major classifications, 3 technically, but really in production, there's 2 major classifications. It actually comes from the Department of Transportation. We have 1.3 and we have 1.4. And 1.3 is aerial pyrotechnics, which is non-consumer. These are, I want to point out, they're not high explosives. They're normal explosive devices. It's not like C4. It's not like det cord or something like that. These are artistic effect. And it's important to note that fireworks are art. And what we're going for isn't necessarily the blast, but what that blast produces: beautiful colors, sound effects, things of this nature. And those fireworks are designed for that. But aerial fireworks, which is the 1.3, which is the stuff we're typically dealing with here, your consumer should never handle those. I'm not going to say that they're unsafe, but they do require particular training and safety awareness to be able to work correctly. And they also require, in almost all instances, a mortar, which, again, most consumers are not going to have. But these shells are I mean, they're fundamentally different in terms of how they operate, and they're typically single thing. Like you might end up getting a fountain or a cake or something like that from a consumer grade that might have lots of different effects in it. Our effects are single purpose, so it's like a, let's say 5-inch red dahlia, or it might be a, 3-inch red, white, blue peony, but it does one thing and one thing only.
How do you make the fireworks? Is it gunpowder?
Black powder. We use different chemicals to be able to create the different effects that we want it to be, so like we have different effects that'll make crackle. We have different effects that'll make it bright and yellow or bright and blue. You mix different chemicals together to ultimately get the effect that you're going for. And it's the process of kind of pulling it all together that you'll ultimately create what are called stars. And stars are those pyrotechnic effects that have been rolled in certain chemicals. And they end up as kind of, if you can imagine, little balls. And those end up like pixels in the sky. Like when you're looking at fireworks and you see the individual lights coming down, those are what we call stars. And you make those by hand. It's important to note every firework out there, everything is made by hand. It doesn't matter if it's made by myself or it's made by a manufacturing facility. Everything is made by hand. There is no real kind of like mass manufacturing of this. And somebody's hands ultimately made every effect that you've ever seen. And one shell might have taken that person 3 days or even longer.
Wow. It takes that long?
Oh, it could take way longer than that. I have a good friend. His name is Jim Widman. That he's also a member of all of this. He's a current record holder for pretty much every large caliber firework you've ever seen. And he'll often work on a single shell for months to get that one perfect shell that goes off.
How careful do you have to be? Like, is there a wiggle room, or if you make one mistake, there goes the house?
We have tables of distances that we have to follow. So if you're doing this, this, and this, you need X number of feet between structures. There's strict criteria and guidelines about what that manufacturing space has to have. Certainly no flame, period. But the other big thing that we have to think about is static electricity. What's the atmospheric pressure? Because certain things, for example, will create atmospheric pressure, which is going to create more static. Lightning, is a huge consideration. I would tell you anytime you're manufacturing, at least for myself, the first thing I'm thinking about is egress. If something happens, how can I get away from here? This is absolutely not something you want to do just in your house or your backyard. You need to have a dedicated space to be able to do this correct.
So when it comes to actually shooting them, is this computerized or is this old school? There's somebody there with a match.
Currently, for our company, with very few exceptions, almost everything is shot electronically in that way. And that really kind of allowed us to be able to do things with much tighter choreography, where we can choreograph the effects and the time that those effects go up in the sky to be able to produce fireworks shows that are cued specifically to music. And so when you see, again, like the 1812 overture, and you hear the cannon fire going, that cannon fire occurring is occurring at the same time we're shooting pyro in the air, and it's perfectly synced up. It's not that you can't do that with electronic firing, which is a manual process where the pyro literally shoots each shell, but they're doing it remotely. The computer is just going to do it with such accuracy that really kind of separates, I would say, the ability to be able to choreograph these shows to a much tighter timeline.
Are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Yeah, sure.
What is your favorite firework? What is your least favorite firework?
Great question. For me, firework is about art, and really what I look for in a great firework, and there's so many different types of effects that are out there. That you can consider. For me, what I really want to look for is just the quality of the shell itself. So I look for symmetry. Is it balanced? Does the left look like the right? Does the top look like the bottom? Is it laid out correctly in the shell? I look for color, vibrance. I really like beautiful, vibrant colors. I look for effect, stuff I've never seen before, like chase sequences where a firework, for example, we call it ghosting, where we'll roll the shells in one color, let it dry, and then we'll roll them in another color. And as the firework burns, it can change colors, for example, from blue to red, and sometimes it'll actually chase around the firework itself, where it'll kind of vibrant, bright, flashing, which is kind of cool. I look for, unusual shapes. We've got these jellyfish shells that'll kind of like be exactly look like a jellyfish, things of this nature, or, certain odd shapes, certainly the stars, the boxes, the hearts, those are always kind of fun to see and do. And from a manufacturing perspective, they're very challenging to create, and make. So that's the kind of stuff I really look for. I've been, again, around pyro my whole life, and, just your standard, just burst in the air, those are obviously fun and they're great, but I'm to the point now where it's really about the art and about creating stuff that hasn't been seen before, or stuff that's very, unusual or very unique. The stuff I don't like, what I don't like, I would say, is probably just unnecessarily loud things. And often in our community, how big can you make it? How big of a boom you could make it? Sometimes you'll hear the term in the community, thump junkies, the people that just want to hear a big boom and a big flash. That's cool. That's cool once or twice, but frankly, it's kind of a waste of pyrotechnic composition when you can make something a little bit more flashy and a little bit more brilliant.
Hardest color to make, easiest color to make.
I'm not going to probably be able to answer this as succinctly as probably people who are more apt for manufacturing that could. With respect to colors, though, I've often heard that getting a really good blue is difficult. And I think one of the easier colors to make is red, because there's several different ways I think you can get to red.
What show do pyrotechnicians like yourself, like what fireworks show do the people who really know consider the best?
From a production perspective, what I really enjoy is bringing that happiness and joy to the crowd. You can't watch a fireworks show and not smile. You can't watch a fireworks show and not point and ooh and ah. And that for me, as I've told people, when we shoot that fireworks show, for that 10 minutes, I'm Mick Jagger, I'm Paul McCartney. I'm the guy who actually gets to bring that happiness to people. And then I get to fade and go back into my normal life, which is wonderful. Now, beyond that, though, to answer the other part of your question, as a pyro, what I really get excited for, again, are going to be these membership-driven organizations, the WPA and PGI, because often at those events and at Winter Blast for the WPA or the PGI conference, that sense of being able to see that kind of one-off, is so very, very awesome. Because, that firework, it's not like a piece of art that's going to hang in a museum that will be there forever. It's every time they make it, it'll be a little bit different. It'll never be the same effect twice. And you get to witness this one little thing. And then if you're not there, it's gone. What I really love about pyrotechnics is the immediacy of it. If you're not there, you missed it. And a firework will never do justice on a video recording or a picture. You might look okay, but what you'll see when you're actually there at these membership events, where your buddy made that effect, I think, to me, is one of the things I really enjoy.
Have you ever been injured?
Thankfully, no. But I will point out, I've also got years of experience and safety and training, and I'm very, very conscious of the safety side of this. I'll tell you, again, growing up in this and shooting pyro with my dad most of my life, I remember something he told me very, very, very young, and I've never forgot it. There are no second chances.
Biggest firework you've set off? Most amount of fireworks you've set off?
In terms of size of fireworks, I routinely shoot large diameter shells. My 4th of July show, which is for the city of Lake Elsinore here in Southern California, our show features 3-inch to 10-inch. So a 10-inch firework is largest routinely I work with, and we'll have a handful of those shells on our show. And I've been part of shows that have had larger shells, 16-inch shells, 20-inch shells, 22s, 24s, but those aren't ones that I've myself physically worked with. But I've been there, and when they go off, man, they are something to be seen. And it's important to note, with respect to shells, we're working in cubic space, and the difference between like a 10 and a 12 inch is almost 50%, in terms of cubic volume. It's bigger. So as these kind of go up in diameter, it's not a linear thing. They get exponentially bigger in terms of, in all possible ways, in terms of burst, in terms of effects, in terms of everything, cost, for that matter as well. Now, in terms of most number of fireworks, my 4th of July show on the for the city of Lake Elsinore, that'll end up having about 400 cues. So a cue is like you hit it and something happens. And so we'll end up having 400 cues, and one cue can end up having multiple shots associated with doubles or triples or things of this nature. And I've worked on bigger shows than that. The Macy's 4th of July show, for example, in New York, each barge has thousands and thousands of fireworks on each one, and there's like 6 barges for that show.
Favorite show you've ever worked on?
For me, there's like certain memories, that are very like stuck in my head that I can remember that were like, oh my God, like that was like for that time and place, like the coolest thing ever. And I've had the pleasure of working with my dad for all of these years. He's been a member of my crew since I've had my license, and shows that in particular that kind of stick out in my mind for one reason or the other. First show I ever worked on was the Macy's 4th of July show. I was 18. I was just graduated high school in May. My dad took me to New York. We worked on that show, and I remember standing on the barge. And I've been to fireworks shows forever, but it was the first time I'd ever worked a show. And I remember standing on that barge, and it's raining down the firework debris, because you're shooting within the fallout zone. We whenever we shoot a show, we know the perimeter in terms of like when the pyro is going to come down, and you're wearing a hard hat and everything. Just seeing these mortars go off in such volume and frequency, I just remember I was hooked for life. It was like, oh, and the smell of the sulfur, the gunpowder that's going off. I was just like, this is, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. There's no question in my mind about it. I'm going to get my license. I'm going to do this forever. I'm also part of the group that does pyrotechnics at Burning Man every year, which takes place as a large temporary city that's constructed outside of Reno, Nevada. And I've worked on that event for almost a decade now. And I remember the first time going and actually doing fire art with pyrotechnics at the same time. Same thing. It was like, just like, it's outstanding. This is something I want to do forever.
When you're that close, is it different than what the audience would see?
Yeah, absolutely. For a couple of technical reasons. And I'll tell you the technical reason here, and then I'll tell you what it's like for me now when I'm working on a fireworks show. So when you're part of a crew, and I would encourage your listeners, if anybody's interested here, I mean, this is something normal people do. I'm a normal person. I have a normal 9-to-5 job, as do almost everybody in the profession. This is not something. Call up your local display company, give me a ring, and you can come out and work on a show. Anybody can do this. In fact, there's a shortage of operators, a desperate shortage, pretty much nationwide. If you look at most of the people in here, there's a lot of gray hair, and this is a very physically demanding job. And there is a huge need for a younger generation to step up and get their license and come shoot a show. We don't have enough operators to shoot the shows that we could possibly shoot. And the first thing you're going to notice is that fireworks are in 3D. Most of the time when you're watching a fireworks show, you've got the audience and you're standing in front of the actual pyro itself, but you're looking at it in the same way that somebody looks at a canvas in a museum, And when you're at the fireworks site, you're seeing these things go off in that third dimension, which is vertical space. And it's kind of fun to actually see the vertical separation between some of these different fireworks that you just don't get when you're watching it, 1,000 feet away. You're just seeing it happen all in front of you. But when you're standing underneath it or next to it, you're seeing happen in another dimension that you just can't physically see unless you're actually standing there. And you're also getting the impact of the actual firework going off itself, the thump. There's a visible and an auditory and a kinetic thing when you're standing near this in that fireworks fallout zone operating that show. You got your hard hat on, you got your firework turnout on, you got your earplugs in. You're physically feeling these things go off, They're going thousands of feet per second in some instances.
Every 4th of July, we always hear about fireworks shows where something goes wrong. What usually goes wrong? Like, what mistake do people make?
And there are certainly accidents that can occur, but a big instances where I see this is that culture. It's that lack of safety mindset and lack of professionalism with respect to producing these shows and allowing for that culture to, come and create an environment where like a safety event can occur.
What is the new thing that's going to come out of fireworks shows? Like, do you think that drones could ever replace them?
I think it could be a great complement to a fireworks show, and they offer a different type of experience, and they're a different tool. Why do I have 5 different types of screwdrivers in my workshop? Because I reach for the tool I need for the job that I want to do. Now, saying that as somebody who likes drones and has shot shows that have included drones, personally, I really like fireworks. And although as a technologist, I enjoy the technology behind this, and I think they're really cool with respect to what they do. I don't think it's a matter of replacement. It's really a complement. It's not an and, it's an or. You can do both.